was in the Imperial Air Corps, I picked up many important skills that helped me in my training to be an astronaut. Everyone has a personal opinion on what they think is the most important skill. Someone who has no experience will think the most important skill is my ability to fly. I certainly had that in excess. The controls of all the simulators were similar enough to what my old bird had. It made that curve go by a lot quicker, but still, there were adjustments. The top G-forces in a jet could exceed what I felt in a shuttle, and I had plenty of experience pushing my maximum, including flying through darkness with only night vision to guide me home, flying nearly to the edge of the atmosphere and back to nearly the ground in minutes, all without passing out, and skirmishes with other jets so far away I couldn't even see the smoke from the wreckage. However, the Imperial family still had to make sure that not only could I handle it, but that I could respond to difficult situations in less than a second. The simulators for the shuttle were visually similar to the jet simulator, but with a lot more buttons and readings. During those training sessions, my arms felt like they were made of lead as I had to flip critical switches, respond to radio transmissions, and also recite the 8 random numbers that appeared in front of the screen. Those tests were quite intense physically and mentally. However, I proved that I was able to meet their demands and that my time in the cockpit wasn't wasted. But there were hundreds of other pilots who could prove that they were capable of the same thing. So that wasn't even close to my most important skill. Those who had a little bit of experience guessed it was my courage that was my most important skill. And courage was certainly not lacking among any of the candidates. Not merely the high adrenaline fears like falling to the ground or being in a fight, though they did test us with that, having us in situations where we were in a capsule falling towards the Earth and had to deploy the chute at just the right time. Too early, and we showed that we panicked and couldn't be trusted with such sensitive equipment. Deploy the chute too late? Well, you'd have the rest of your life to enjoy the view. We lost a few good pilots in that test, but the tests in our bravery were a lot more esoteric than that also. They tested nearly every phobia I could think of. We were put into complete darkness for hours at a time, not told when we could leave, confined into a tight box that you couldn't even wiggle your arms in, told to breathe slowly while a group of doctors monitored both your heart rate and your oxygen consumption. It's easy to hide your fear from the world, but it's a lot harder to hide it from yourself. If you consumed too much oxygen, you were kicked out. Most of the candidates failed that one. Other tests for fears felt like something out of a game show. Being in a box full of spiders as they crawled over you, being put through a maze in low light while infrasound played, heightening your paranoia and making visions of gray figures appear while you had 3 minutes to solve the maze. And even though bravery filtered out most of the candidates, that wasn't the most important skill. When there were only a dozen candidates left, it became apparent that I was the only one who had the most important skill. None of the other candidates knew when to be silent. When there were a dozen of us, they had us all in the same barracks, and weird things started to happen. At first, it was something small, a missing pen, a notebook that was replaced with a blank, and then it escalated. Simulators would suddenly glitch partway through, so you went from flying to crashing immediately and had seconds to react. New cameras were found in the barracks and the bathrooms, making the other candidates feel paranoid about who was watching them. It really escalated when they started taking our pictures for Share My Day. They took our pictures both as groups and as individuals. They explained that our pictures were being shared online, but they didn't say what was being said with it. Those who said a picture was worth 1,000 words probably didn't realize that what a single caption could change about a photo. A photo of a man forcibly kissing a woman could be shared around as a sign of romance because of the right caption. Bodies of children posed to look like they were at play could be shared around as a picture of a perfect family when you erase the word funeral. A picture of an innocent person could easily be made into the most hated person on the planet when the caption declares them a criminal. The poses they asked us to do felt odd. Some pictures were simple, a picture of me strapped into the centrifuge with my hair styled to look fashionably blown back, even though it should logically look like a mess. Other pictures made a lot less sense for social media, such as being woken up in the middle of the night and being asked to stand over other candidates still sleeping in bed while I quietly loomed over them all. Soon after, the cafeteria with the other candidates was once full of laughing and chatting, was now full of hushed whispers. I made sure not to discuss anything with anyone, a skill that was taught to me the hard way by my dad. But everyone else kept talking about their worries, paranoid thoughts about being isolated on purpose from their families, or that their pictures were being taken of them that were being used for ulterior motives, such as framing us as the bad guys. These worries felt silly to me, not because they felt invalid, but because they were talking about it with each other. It was silly that they thought their conversations or notes were private. I did not expect privacy. Every document, every conversation, every action, and every thought, I had to keep focused on the task at hand. There was always someone listening, and the sooner they accepted that, the better it would be for everyone. I knew to keep quiet and keep my thoughts to myself, and sure enough, my silence paid off. In just a few weeks, I was the only candidate left. Everyone else went home one at a time. The last candidate to leave tried passing a message to me on a scrap of paper when they shook my hand one last time. I just threw it away. Whatever it wasn't my business, and they were either gonna try to make me doubt myself, or it was another test. So obviously, it was important that I never read the paper. After a few more weeks of training by myself, I was told that I was the chosen candidate. I would be the first astronaut to board the brand new orbiting space station, or OSS, a test project by the Empire of the Seven Cities to see what it would take to have astronauts survive the long trip to and from other planets in the solar system. Similar projects were being run by other groups such as the Mad Scientist Union, the Triple Alliance, and Comet. But this would be exclusive to the Seven Cities Empire. While I didn't ask any questions, I did pay enough attention to the world situation to know why they were so insistent on doing it themselves. Decades ago, under the old emperor, the Seven Cities openly collaborated with the League of Nations to explore space, and specifically, to bring humanity to the moon. In those days, it felt like there was going to be some new glorious space age. Over 300 people from all over the world had been to the moon in less than 2 decades. Every nation, every kingdom, every empire, every guild, and every union had someone they could show as a visitor to the moon. Everyone had some part they played in the great pilgrimage to the moon, and many people around the world saw this space age as the beginning of permanent peace in the world. That was until the launch of the shuttle Selene 7. It was intended to be the first shuttle to bring colonists to the moon. At that point, only a few small bases existed on the moon. The shuttle exploded less than a minute after launching, with casualties well into the hundreds, both on board the shuttle and from the falling wreckage. The Emperor declared that it was sabotaged and withdrew all support from the League of Nations Selene program. All scientists who worked on the Selene program were either paper-clipped or they had to escape the Empire by heading to the Triple Alliance in the south. This greatly slowed the Selene program without the financial and scientific support of the Seven Cities, but it didn't stop the program. Not at all. And while the Seven Cities focused on imprisoning their best scientists, other nations leaped ahead. The Mad Scientist Union created a series of satellites around the world, and they were able to locate where anyone on the ground was and how to get almost anywhere on the planet. They provided this technology freely to every country and person on the planet. Now, this global positioning system was used for everything from navigating the roads, predicting the weather, managing military fleets, and delivering flatbreads. Countries such as the Triple Alliance, Tahuantinsuyu, Kemet, and even the Middle Kingdom were sending scientific probes to every planet in reach, with talks about exploring the cloud beyond the edge of the solar system. New discoveries, theories, and experiments were being discussed constantly by their governments. The League of Nations were maintaining a network of research space stations in orbit, and even colonial bases on the moon that were almost cities upon themselves. While their scientific research didn't feel as relevant as new planets, they were still big players in the scientific community, and as far as the League was concerned, the space age was just beginning. The dreams of the entire solar system being within humanity's grasp seemed like it could be achieved very soon, and it was still anyone's game. Well, almost anyone. I love my empire, I trust my emperor, and I have faith in his divine right. But I am not stupid. If the space age was a game of pits, then everyone else was scoring hoops down in the field, while the seven cities were stuck in the stands trying to tie their shoes, while bragging to everyone else that they were going to win. Here we were in the year 2775, and we were still talking about sending a single astronaut to the only space station owned by the seven cities. And from the way everyone was acting, it was like I was going to break the biggest barrier in history. Tons of pictures were taken of me holding plaques, models of the OSS, and even pointing up at the moon in the sky like an explorer finding the horizon. People kept calling me the first imperial citizen to be in space. Again, I kept quiet, not to correct anyone, but who were they fooling? Sure, it wasn't discussed a lot in schools anymore, but people do remember the old space relay, right? The message to the world from the lunar surface? I step here today, but we will all walk here tomorrow. Back in my father's day, it was the biggest moment of his life, and he talked about it like it was a religious experience. But from how everyone acted, it almost seemed like they forgot it all. They even walked me out for some meet and greets, signing pictures of myself for children and young teens. The first time a child asked me if I was going to be the first man in space, I only chuckled. By the fifth time, I stopped finding it funny as I chuckled. When adults my own age or even older asked me that question, I was at a loss at how to respond. Thankfully, by that point, my social media liaison gave me the official response. Tomorrow, I'll be breaking a lot of barriers. Just enough of an answer that no one outside of the seven cities would think I was claiming to be the first man in space, but anyone who asked me if I was going to be the first man in space thought I was agreeing with him. A way of answering the question without answering the question. It didn't matter what I felt about it. I knew when to keep quiet, and I knew when to listen. After the meet and greet the next day, I was strapped into Hera 1, the shuttle made for getting to the OSS. The countdown continued while I sat looking up at the sky. My thoughts focused on the mission and tried not to remember the comic I saw as a child, of a man sitting in the rocket thinking that every part of it was built by the lowest bidder. That wasn't technically true in the ship, but every part of it was built in one of the seven cities. And in a way, that was much worse than the lowest bidder. Every piece was overpriced and built by someone who was probably more concerned about getting the job done than doing a good job. As the last few seconds of the count disappeared, my thoughts vanished as the world below me exploded. The noise was louder than a cannon, and the pressure pushed me back in my seat as the earth tried to rip me down, and thousands of kilograms of exploding hydrogen struggled to tear me into the heavens above. After a few moments, the explosions won as I rose up and up. I struggled to keep my rocket in the correct vector as I rose higher and higher in the sky. making sure the shuttle made it through the digital squares on the screen in front of me. A lot of the people assumed that the shuttles simply shot up straight into the air to get where they needed to go. The truth was, there were a lot of factors to consider. The Coriolis effect, for one, could easily have me on the wrong end of the planet with no fuel if I couldn't compensate for it. And gravity, jet streams, other aircraft, spacecraft, and even space debris were all factors that dictated the vectors that Hera had to take. Even the time that the Hera launched was all factored into the process of getting me up to the OSS. The OSS orbited the planet every 90 minutes. Timing was the prime priority. If we launched too soon, we could have the OSS collide with the Hera, destroying both and leaving my body beyond burial. If we launched too late, then the OSS would be nowhere to be seen, and the Hera would have to either land back on Earth before it ran out of fuel, or land after running out of fuel. But thankfully, I hit every vector as the sky in front of me turned from blue to gray to blue again to green, weirdly enough, before fading away to black with distant stars. Far more than I ever saw on Earth. The shuttle lightened as some of the rockets fell behind me. A flip of a few switches and my thrusters lit as the shuttle rushed to hit new vectors. Up here, it was different. I glanced down at Earth below, and it was more beautiful than I ever imagined. Blues and greens and grays all blended below as the shuttle rushed to meet the OSS. This was one of the most delicate parts of the entire operation. Even though the OSS and the Hera were both moving over 27,000 kilometers an hour, they appeared to be barely moving at all. Relative speeds were quite interesting. I was moving faster than any vehicle on Earth, but here I had to adjust the Hera to what felt like a snail's pace. I adjusted the burners around the shuttle as I got closer and closer to the OSS. Carefully, I observed the camera as I slid the shuttle's airlock to the OSS's airlock. This reminded me of parallel parking during my driving test. Except on Earth, if I failed a parallel park, I dented a fender. If I failed this parallel parking while in space, I would dent right through the hole. I watched the camera carefully as a loud clunk rattled through the shuttle. All readings were green. I connected to the OSS successfully. Unstrapping myself, I held on to a handle by where I sat as I carefully pulled myself over to the airlock. The movies make it look like your weightlessness automatically made you careful. But the truth was, you had to be careful in the weightless environment, because otherwise you could easily overshoot and get yourself hurt. I had training in gravity flights, and of course I experienced free fall in a jet before, but it was different in orbit. The free fall never ended here. It felt like my stomach was in my throat and it never came back down. And it didn't help that it was almost vertigo inducing. My mind wanted to orient myself so that my head was up, but there was no true up. It was wherever I was facing. The console that was once in front of me, but now it was below me as I grabbed the first tools and supplies as I made it to the airlock. A few final checks and I pushed the button opening the door to the OSS airlock. It was white and almost sterile looking. A few more buttons and I was inside the OSS. My first thought when I got inside was, it was cramped. There was a large console that took up much of the room. There was a single porthole showing the planet outside. My orientation got really screwy looking at it. It felt like the Earth was below and I could fall any moment if I stepped on the glass. Then the orientation felt reversed and it became a giant sphere waiting to fall out of the sky and crush me and the OSS. I shook my head and focused back on the OSS. The room was very round, but also very small. Smaller than my studio apartment on Earth. There was a wall that had some straps and a sleeping bag tied to it where I would sleep. There was a large console where most of my work would take place. There was also a specialized exercise machine just across from the console. It would allow me to do full body workouts while in space. It would decrease the effects of microgravity and allow me to keep some of my bone, muscle, and cardiac density. And then there were the lockers. One was my bathroom, another held my equipment and personal item, and the final held all of my food that I was going to eat for the next 6 months. I checked the console, and sure enough, there was already a message from my social media liaison down on Earth. Take a selfie from the OSS and send it back. Checking my equipment locker, I saw a digital camera. I took a few pictures of myself, some with Earth in the background and others without it. Connecting the camera to the console, I sent the pictures. After a few moments, I got confirmation and then my work schedule. Looking it over, a part of my heart dropped. Every minute on the OSS was planned out over the next 6 months. 16 hours of work and 8 hours of sleep. Even my time for eating and using the bathroom was scheduled, and I was expected to work during that time. While I expected long hours, what I didn't expect was the amount of time I would be spending with my social media liaison. Even an hour a day felt excessive to me. I understood the importance of taking lots of pictures of space for scientific research, but it felt like most of these pictures were going to be posted on Share My Day. At least that was my assumption by the 10 hours a day I would be spending taking pictures asked for by my liaison. I don't even know their name. They never bothered to provide it to me on Earth, and now it just felt awkward to ask up here. As for the rest of my day, 2 hours would be spent exercising and 4 hours would be spent providing the results of the readings from the console. Looking over the dials and readings, I realized I had no idea what most of them meant. I understood a few, such as power, temperature, oxygen levels, and even the vectors I could understand, but others were not anything I had ever seen before. There was a dial that measured something called EE with a range of 0 to 100. There was a digital display that measured something called PKE and had fluctuating values that were always negative. And of course, attached to the work schedule was a list of rules that I would need to follow while in space. Number 1. The radio only has one frequency, ground control. It will be available for only 28 minutes during each orbit around the planet. That time is between minutes 11 and 39. Any orders received from ground control must be followed as soon as possible. Any transmissions received outside of that range of minutes 11 and 39 are not from ground control and must be ignored. Number 2. You are the only living thing to have been in space. Number 3. The electronics within the OSS are quite fragile. Even crumbs and water drops can damage life support. Therefore, food and water should only be consumed during times given on your schedule. If it's consumed outside of the scheduled times, inform ground control and follow the directions. Number 4. You are the only human who's ever been in space. Number 5. Nothing lives out in space. If you hear something knocking on the outside of the hole, it isn't alive. Don't let it in, don't go outside, don't look at it. It'll leave you alone if it thinks the OSS is empty. Number 6. Nothing dies out here. Number 7. There should be no other satellites, shuttles, nor vehicles visible at any point during the orbit. If that changes, take a picture of what you see and send it to your liaison. Do not ask ground control for help. They'll hear you. Number 8. You are the only Imperial citizen to have been in space. Number 9. Occasionally you'll see the moon through the cameras. It will be safe to view, and it is encouraged to look at. If the moon turns silver, set the cameras to record and stop looking at the moon immediately. Send the video to your social media liaison without looking at it, marking the video as Silver Moon, timestamp it started. It should return to normal and be safe to look at 8 minutes after it turned silver. Number 10. No one has ever seen all of the moon's phases before. Number 11. If the moon turns black, you have 1 minute to turn off the radio. Leave the radio off as long as the moon is black. Leave the radio off for an additional minute after it returns to normal. Do not record the black moon. Do not take pictures. She likes being heard, not recorded. Do not tell anyone about the black moon, not even your liaison. If you do not turn off the radio, the howls will change something in you that you don't want changed. 12. Don't listen to the moon. It doesn't lie, but you'll wish it did. 13. If the planet below changes, record it all on cameras, regardless of the color of the moon and/or moons, and turn off the radio during the event. Ground control will be unreachable. Take plenty of pictures too and send them to your liaison after the planet returns to normal. The planet should return back to normal after one full orbit. Number 14. The OSS was built only by the Empire of the Seven Cities and no one else. 15. It's easy to get paranoid in space. Keep talking with ground control every day to keep yourself centered. If you start experiencing hallucinations, inform your liaison. If they tell you it's okay to tell ground control about your hallucinations, then tell ground control and follow their directions. Number 16. There's only one OSS. Any other orbiting space stations are not the OSS. 17. You may play music at any point during your mission. If music plays without you turning it on, turn it off at your convenience. The music player tends to glitch. If the music player stops without you telling it to, leave it off for the rest of the orbit. That's not a glitch. Number 18. Your liaison can be reached at any point during orbit. Doesn't mean they'll always respond. Number 19. If you wish to contact someone on ground other than ground control or your liaison, inform your liaison, tell them who you want to contact, and provide the message in full. If they decide it's not a risk to Imperial security, they will pass on the message. If someone wants to contact you, your liaison will decide if it's best to send it to you or if it's better to censor it. 20. Trust your social media liaison. Trust yourself only with their say-so. Number 21. Do not take the shuttle back to Earth except on the return date, regardless of the situation. If you leave too soon, you may never return. If you return too late, you'll never leave. Number 22. If you see anything strange, it can be explained. Take pictures and send them to your liaison. They'll explain it to you. Eventually. Reading the rules reminded me of something else about my dad when I was growing up. The amount of times he would contradict himself, and when reality agreed that he was wrong, then clearly reality was in the wrong. He would not put up with anyone disagreeing with how he saw the world. He lost a lot of jobs that way when he inevitably got into fights with his boss about how he was right. I remember all the times he came home complaining to my mother about how all of his coworkers were idiots and how whatever they did, or what my mom did, or what I did was always wrong. Even as a child, that didn't feel right, but I learned quickly not to say anything. Silence meant safety from someone who thought themselves as right. It meant they didn't target you, they didn't care what you actually thought, but as long as you didn't question it, they wouldn't try to make it so you would see it their way. I read the rules one more time before I decided to employ my most important skill again: remaining silent. I get started with my schedule as I record the readings on the dial in front of me, writing the readings down, filling in the spreadsheet, And when I was done, I was to send the results to my social media liaison. Of course. I record the negative values on the dial marked PKE just as the music player came on and started playing an unfamiliar violin tune.